Hi, my friends. Thanks for joining us today. Uh, I'm Tim, your compadre on our journey through the Bible. Our reading for today was in Acts chapter 14, 15, and 16. Now, yesterday we ended on Acts chapter 13, and I want you to know that that chapter might be considered the continental divide of the book of Acts. Before then, in those first 12 chapters, the church was centered in Jerusalem, and it was primarily Jewish, although Gentiles were beginning to believe and be added to the church. Peter, in those chapters, is the central figure in the church. But starting with chapter 13, Antioch becomes the center of the church, while even more Gentiles come to faith in Christ. The disciples are first called Christians in Antioch. And from this point on in the book, Paul becomes the most important person in the latter half of the book. Acts is written that way. And as you study it out, you'll notice that for every miracle that Peter performed in those first 12 chapters, Paul performed a corresponding miracle in the latter half of the book. For example, Peter um, healed a man who was lame from birth. Paul healed a man who was lame from birth. Peter raised someone from the dead. Paul raised someone from the dead. An important part also of the church in Antioch was that those people were concerned about sending out missionaries to places who had never heard the gospel, starting with Paul and Barnabas, the first missionaries. One of the things we know about being a missionary is that there is a price to be paid, and they were willing to pay the price. We read in Acts chapter 14, verse 19, there came thither certain Jews from Antioch and Iconium, who persuaded the people, and having stoned Paul, drew him out of the city, supposing he had been dead. Howbeit, as the disciples stood round about him, he rose up and came into the city. And the next day he departed with Barnabas to Derbe. Well, the enemies of Paul finally caught up with him and stirred up the crowd and the multitudes. Same people who were ready to sacrifice to him because they thought he was a god before, now they're ready to stone him. It's kind of a reminder of Paul's experience with Stephen. Um, Now Paul is the one who's being stoned. And we don't know for sure. The Bible is not clear about this, but this could be the experience that Paul mentioned in one of his epistles, 2 Corinthians 12, 2 to 4, where he says, I knew a man in Christ about 14 years ago, whether in the body I cannot tell, or whether out of the body I cannot tell, God knoweth. Such an one was caught up to the third heaven. And I knew such a man, whether in the body or out of the body, I cannot tell, God knoweth, how that he was caught up into paradise and heard unspeakable words, which is not lawful for a man to utter. Could be that Paul was dead for a period of time, while those who stoned him thought that they succeeded and he was actually dead. And during that time, he had a chance to see heaven and hear some of those things that he could never talk about on this earth. And of course, a good part of the story is how the disciples gathered around the body of Paul, maybe wondered, what do we do next? Maybe planning his funeral. When all of a sudden he gets up and goes right back into the city where they had just stoned him. It's almost like he was saying, "Hey, guys, you need to get more stones." You know, you can always tell something is a high priority with someone with one question: what does it take to bump it? Now, you would think stoning might do it when it comes to ministry in a particular area, but not with Paul. You know, there is a price to be paid when you choose to follow Jesus wholeheartedly. It's about a commitment to following him. It's about laying it all on the line in order to make a difference in the lives of others. It's about a willingness to suffer and face abuse from those who reject God. There is a price to pay for all who would be true disciples of Jesus. Now, I know some bad things happen to us because this life is filled with pain. Some bad things happen to us because we just get stupid sometimes. But there are times when bad things happen because we're doing all we can to reach others for Christ. Is it really worth it? Is the price of suffering worth a reward? There are pastors today who tell their people, no, it's not worth it. Suffering is never God's will for people. He loves you. He just wants you to be successful, to be prosperous, to be healthy 100% of the time. Is it worth it? Paul would say suffering is worth the price. My first wife, Dawn, I think is a good example in a way. I had been a pastor at a church in Michigan for 10 years and felt it was time to move on. And I resigned, but we were not sure what would be next for us in ministry when I was asked to help a mission church in Washington State where the pastor had a medical emergency and he needed someone to step in and take his place for 6 months. But that was also exactly at the same time when Dawn had cancer, and we'd just been told there was nothing more they could do in terms of treatment, and she may have just 6 months left to live. People were concerned that she might die out in that strange place in Washington State, helping this church that they're not familiar with, and they were asking, is that really the way you want it to happen? And I love Dawn's answer. She said that's exactly how she would want it to happen. And it was. It turned out that is the way it happened. She was active in serving the Lord until literally her last day. She was planning to lead a ladies' Bible study at our church on the day she died. It turned out to be her last day on earth, but her first day in heaven. How about you, my friend? Wouldn't you want to meet the Lord, still faithful and still serving Him? I can guarantee you, 1 minute in heaven, that'd be exactly the way you would want to meet Him. And that was true for the Apostle Paul. He faced beatings and shipwrecks and jail time in his service for the Lord, and he would agree it's all worth it. But when you think about that today, meditate on that, give it some thought, and stay in the Word. Tomorrow our reading is in Acts chapter 17 to 19. I'll be reading there, and I'll look forward to being back with you again tomorrow. Have a great day, folks.